You either live by the gun, or you die by the sword.
Twas brillig in the slithy toves, did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and mome raths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwocky, Chris.
I shall. Though this one specifically, I don't think I have to try too hard.
Yeah, welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nico.
And I'm Chris.
And you were afraid I was going to butcher this intro.
I was, because I have a hard time reading this poem.
Spoilers, I did this for choir in, middle school.
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
You all think you know what we're doing, but you're wrong. It's the one that's not Monty Python based. Not the short film that came out a year before.
It's Monty Python adjacent.
It is Monty Python adjacent. I find it hilarious to call it Monty Python based because it was originally released to America and North America in general as Monty Python Presents. And that is not true. And it really bothered the writer and director, Terry Gilliam, sorry.
Yeah, but it's based on the poem by Lewis Carroll with screenplay by Charles Avery and Terry Gilliam, directed by Gilliam.
Yeah, starring half of the Monty Python group.
Yeah, starring Michael Palin as Dennis Cooper, Harry H. Corbett as the Squire, and John Le Monsieur as the Chamberlain.
And David Prowse is in this. This is the last role he did pre-Darth Vader, so Darth Vader is in this.
Yeah, and it's a silly movie about a peasant who gets the unfortunate quest or is forced along the lines to go eventually fight the Jabberwocky.
Yes, it is. And granted, I know that this is not technically a Monty Python film. However, Terry was one of the main writers and directors for the Monty Python group. Granted, I know it was a joint effort by a lot of them, but you can really clearly see where his humor was in the Monty Python. And also, you can really clearly tell where the overlap with Life of Brian and this was.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, it's Monty Python with a little bit more horror to it. Especially, it starts off with the goofy poem.
It does.
But then gets into the creature vision that feels like it's supposed to be a bit of, a Monty Python sketch, the creatures attacking. But
because it's definitely just a guy holding the camera.
Yeah, until you get the gore. And it's okay, well, this isn't supposed to be... it's supposed to be funny, but it's also this actually little gory bits.
And I do think that it's kind of interesting because granted, I like the Monty Python group, and I like most of their members. I like following their careers. I have not done a crazy deep dive. I do not have the time. But I do find it super interesting when I do come across their individual works or their individual credits, how you can see where different ones were pulling each other back and forth as far as reining in some of this type of humor or reining in this case, some of the more horror elements. And also, Terry has this habit of really inserting kind of heavy-handedly modern problems of the world into his movies. This one leans so hard into bureaucracy and how terrible economy can be.
Yeah, well, so with that too, I think that's one of my biggest issues is that Jabberwocky, at least for me, has a hard time balancing that comedy with serious. Yeah. And I think part of it too is that it feels like there's a bunch of sketches within this movie, but it doesn't carry along a single, it has a overarching plot, but it feels so disjointed compared to some of his other stuff, or Monty Python, or Monty Python and the Holy Grail specifically, which
did come out right before this one,
and also had a lot more. 2 years, but
that was the last thing he worked on, though. I believe
Miracle of Flying Short he did.
Yeah, that one
but...
we don't qualify that one. That was a TV short.
Yeah, but it's this where Monty Python has this longer timeline of stuff, and then it branches out.
And it has more characters to bounce off of, too.
Jabberwocky has this hard time with Cooper being such a goof.
He is such a goof.
And...
such a goober.
It just feels like all the comedic bits don't really feel like they connect 100%. And I get the commentary, and I get the jokes in themselves are kind of funny, but it just feels set apart from the rest of the silliness of the movie and the silliness of the poem it's based on.
I agree, and I do think that, unfortunately, I think part of the reason for that is because it's too heavy-handed in its theming of commerce, poverty, bureaucracy, happiness. Like, those themes are, like, definitely interesting, but I do think that it's you can clearly see where the balance that other Monty Python skits where he's working with others, that they're balancing out that more sobering humor with more lighthearted and slapstick and, like, keeping the pace going. This one, we kind of just get drug from terrible scene to terrible scene without that added level of silliness.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's because I want it to be my Monty Python, but it isn't. It's just adjacent.
It is adjacent, and don't get me wrong, I still greatly enjoyed this movie. However, there is one thing that I read a lot of other people's reviews and comments going into this just to kind of get a taste, see how it was, because I would say I'm a pretty big Monty Python fan. I would argue I'm a pretty big Terry fan. But I hadn't watched a ton of Jabberwocky. I'd seen it before, but I didn't really remember, like, a whole lot about it. And I now remember why. And don't be wrong, I am a 13-year-old boy in humor and enjoyment. This movie is so heavy-handed in potty humor that it kind of ruins it at times.
Well, and that's the thing, too, is, like, it's not all potty humor. There's, like...
No, but it is a lot of potty humor.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. The comedic bits have their good spots here and there, especially, like, the announcing of Rush Hour and the market's supposed to be funny.
Funny.
The turnips for crowd snacks.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, like you even said, there's a social commentary of how shitty the city works. Like with you can't get in the city unless you're
already got money.
Or you're there to spend money.
Yes. No, like there's a lot of this movie that is funny, but whereas other Terry productions or even Monty Python productions have like a wider variety of jokes and gags to kind of keep everyone possible involved. And I think that's part of the reason why Monty Python as a whole is so easy to recommend to people. There's something for everyone humor-wise for the most part. This one leans a little bit too heavy-handed where, like, there's a good joke and then there's a piss joke. Yeah. There's a good joke and then there's a poop joke.
Well, and that's the thing. I think if it had stuck with more of Cooper's story, because or making the jokes more around Cooper, I think it would have been great because, one, I do like the princess jump to conclusions. It's that play
I do too. She's hilarious.
It's the play on the classic fairy tale of like, okay, of course she's supposed to be rescued by a prince, but she gets rescued, or basically her champion is this peasant, which
idiot.
But you see that in a lot of like the old Grimm's fairy tales too. It's a peasant tricking his way into royalty or doing valiant deeds to do the same thing.
Absolutely.
But I like it because it's this guy who doesn't want to be this hero accidentally being mistakenly put into this. I mean, the hero falls. I mean, even though the whole premise of this movie is creating an enemy to prevent the hero from slaying it, or slaying the Jabberwocky, because you know what? War and chaos is actually kind of good for commerce for these people.
And this movie kind of lightly follows the same line of Monty Python or the Holy Grail's idea of having multiple characters to kind of break up the story, break up the humor, break up the like ideas, where we have our main guy, but then we also have the princess and we also have the king. But I wish there was more of that, because unfortunately this movie reads really hard as just a pre-write for Life of Brian.
Yeah.
It feels like a trial run. And don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed it. I will watch it again for sure. But because it's so heavily focused on Cooper, like, we have other characters, we barely spend any time with them.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing is, like, I like Gilliam quite a bit.
I do too.
And granted, I haven't seen everything, but what I've seen is, like, Jabberwocky, while it has its moments, good and bad, you can see the start and precursor to what would eventually become Time Bandits.
Absolutely, you can. And I don't mind that.
Yeah, I mean, even Brazil, I mean, you've got this group, like all these movies, I mean, even The Fisher King, although The Fisher King is much more dark and, I mean, Brazil's dark too in its own regards, but it's got that connecting one main focal character, and then you have these little bits around it, whereas Cooper, he's kind of as sporadic as the gags in between as well, and I think that's the biggest issue.
I agree, but one thing that I do like, and a big part of the reason why I like Terry's works in general, is that he does a really nice job of bringing the darker aspect to a movie. Most of my movies that I like from him that are like, ooh, you gotta watch that, or oh, you haven't seen that, like, example, Brothers Grimm, I love Brothers Grimm. It's a great dark interpretation of stuff. Is it a good movie? No, not really. But I love it because it's such an interesting, different take. And I do think you can see that dark idea happening in Jabberwocky. But I don't think we quite get far enough.
Yeah.
You know, like with the intro with the gore, good. More of that.
Well, and maybe it's a budget thing too, because all these movies we're talking about, he has a much bigger budget to work with.
That's true.
And kind of in an opposite of Del Toro, where granted, The Shape of Water and all his movies still have a high budget. It's the, I guess, the freedom that a larger budget allows you to do additional stuff or make the overall, you have the time to actually make this story more cohesive. And I think that's my biggest thing is the cohesion of the story. With even though like it is political and all its talks and stuff, it doesn't hit all those points that I want it to hit.
No, I agree. And I think the other thing is, unfortunately, and I get why he was mad when it was released in North America as a Monty Python production as opposed to a Terry production. Mm-hmm. But it is, I think, a little bit too close to the normal levels of humor and darkness that the Monty Python group would have put out. I think if we had leaned a little bit harder into the darkness, into the gory aspect, even with a low budget, because honestly, I really think that the very obviously not real cow skeleton that's like floating around at one point, that's good. It's honestly pretty good. Like it's gory. Like the one guy who's cut off both of his feet, that is much more gory than we normally would have seen in a Python skit. That would have been much brighter. It would have been much more humorous. Yeah, I mean the Knights tournament just getting bloodier and bloodier and just gorier and gorier. It's like, okay, this is great. And like it is lightly sprinkled throughout. I feel like this movie would have been like that next step. This would have been like a shining, like, super dark humor. Yeah. If we had just taken it just a little bit farther consistently throughout. I think what would have made it more interesting and compelling, because it is this mistaken rags to riches stories for Cooper, if it really pushed him through the horrors of like, okay, well, he's in this tournament. Maybe he accidentally kills a man that he's not trying to kill. Yes. Like he does with the knight at the end and also the Jabberwocky itself. Like everything he does, he fails splendidly at. He trips up the ladder, essentially, everywhere he goes. And it is kind of fun to watch him flop his way through this story because he is such a useless idiot. But he's a likable enough idiot. Yeah, well, he's not totally useless. He just has terrible luck. Yeah, well, he's likable because we like that he is going from this nothing character being disowned and like I think he's likable because he is feeling upwards, but also because regardless of everything that's been thrown at him, like he has a great life ahead of him. He still wants his beloved Griselda, who wants nothing to do with him. Nothing. None of her family wants anything to do with him. No, the other thing that I think for me would have probably pushed this movie over the edges, by this point, the list of people who were willing to work with Gilliman and just a Monty Python group in general was pretty long. Like, they'd done well. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Yeah. I kind of had hoped that with this being an attempt at a darker fairy tale telling, that we would have gone back to having a much tighter cast of people, which ended up making it almost a running gag that multiple people played multiple characters. And so you had this like recurring character problem of like, well, that's the same person I just saw, but it ended up being humorous and then also just kind of an interesting bit. I kind of wish that this had tightened itself down there a little bit so that we could have had more story building. Exactly. It goes back to Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Again, the reason I keep bringing it back is because it's one of the best ones. Well, and it's so adjacent to it because Monty Python, what it did so well is it gave you this ridiculous King Arthur story with him and his squires, and then he collects his knights as he goes. This is just, okay, one sketch after another. And I think that's the issue. Is like that's my biggest thing with the comedies I end up not liking is when every single scene or set or every single line is supposed to be a joke. And even though Monty Python does a lot of that, it sure does. Monty Python has these kind of semi-serious long build jokes where this one isn't really much of a long build joke outside of
Cooper and his fall upwards.
That's true. And granted, I know Terry and Monty Python group in general, they got their start in smaller sketch style like bits, but I had kind of hoped, and I think eventually we got there, like having watched other works from him, that we would have seen a much heavier lean into that idea of like a much more continuous running gag, having that better pacing, having the more continuous character and story that like really just ties it together, as opposed to having a bunch of small skits, which I mean works in some aspects, but now that we're wanting to focus on these bigger pictures, doesn't quite translate as well.
Yeah, and maybe it's partly too because the horror elements don't contrast the goofiness, because even then, like, well, the Jabberwocky, while a little gross, is still just a bit goofy when we finally have the reveal. It kind of makes me think of some of Evil Dead, where like it was supposed to be serious, and then it just is like, okay, this is a little too goofy, like, for me to take it seriously. But that's the thing is, you intend for a serious movie and it ends up goofy, where this is trying that little too hard to toe that line of, okay, well, we're Monty Python adjacent, but we're a little bit darker than that, and it doesn't get that too dark.
It doesn't, and I don't think necessarily the Jabberwocky itself is fully the problem. Again, I think if we'd sprinkled the bigger, darker elements more heavily throughout, I think the end puppetry would have been fine.
Yeah, and I think the only reason I bring up the Jabberwocky as kind of like this epitome of all this is because the only other scene we really saw it in is when it was killing that guy.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
I would have liked more.
Yeah.
More scenes of like the carnage that he is causing.
Make it a little bit more important to the, like, encounter it a couple times, or show it, like, kind of hint a little bit, instead of like, okay, well, this Jabberwocky's actually good for our economy. We got to stop the hero from killing this cash creature.
Which, don't get me wrong, hilarious, but again, a little bit too heavy-handed in the whole, like, running theme and conversation on whether or not bureaucracy is evil. However, the puppetry for this Jabberwocky, now that we've brought it up, I actually really like this thing.
I do. It's a little Jim Henson-esque for me.
But that makes sense, because it is a man walking backwards with his arms as the wings, which is why they flap the goofiest way humanly possible. And then its head is marionetted just off screen.
Yeah.
My only complaint, and it's only a complaint because, again, I do think we were trying to go a hair more serious than this ended up actually being, is the strings for the puppet's head are, like, super freaking visible.
Yeah, it's that is the thing, is like I think that's the other weird thing too, is like we don't have any other puppetry like this through the rest of the movie, so it feels a little out of place compared to, like, when we get to Monty Python, going back to Monty Python again, in the stop motion that they have, or the bunny is like, but that's the thing, is like, it's supposed to be goofy, whereas this is a little bit more serious.
And honestly, this puppet is so cool that I would have loved to see, like, a quick snip of it stomping through the forest, as opposed to just having the camera running through trees and branches, which, don't get me wrong, cool and a very effective way to use a very low budget.
Makes me think of the stick in Evil Dead.
Yeah, a little bit. But, like, we already have this thing built in full. Like, it's a full puppet model. Could we not have had, like, a real quick, like, snapshot of it, like, of its tail, of its leg here and there, like having it lumber around, and
build up like they did with Godzilla, with we see the footstep and then you see the head,
which is interesting because it's claimed in a couple of different, like, locations that, like, Godzilla was the inspiration for how they ended up doing the monster, and how they try to, like, film at the beginning with the loud stomping and the roaring and, like, the earthquake sort of situation. So clearly inspired by Godzilla. Why not go that little extra step?
Well, I think that brings us to the big issue, is that while it is based off the Jabberwocky, granted, is a catalyst. It's such a side catalyst for the rest of the movie and what's happening that doesn't feel like it's very much part of Cooper's arc. He just happens to fall into being the slayer of this great beast.
And this is where I think, especially comparing it to Life of Brian, which I know isn't, like, necessarily ideal, but these two movies are so similar in idea and concept. Life of Brian works because you don't need to know, like, everyone already knows the life of Christ. Most people have at least the bare, like, born to a virgin, died on the cross aspects figured out. Donkey rides in between.
Yeah.
So, like, you don't need to have all of this extra work to, like, have the joke pay off, essentially. While I think most people know of the Jabberwocky, and they definitely know Carol's other works, this is a nonsensical poem that, like, doesn't really build to, like, there's no story in it. And then the Alice in Wonderland portion, Through the Looking Glass, where this poem comes from, isn't about the Jabberwocky in the same way that, like, the Bible is about Christ, you know?
Yeah.
It's like you don't have this already pre-established, well-documented understanding of what the story is supposed to be. So that way when we miss all of the actual stuff the Jabberwocky is supposed to be doing, you don't feel like you're missing it because you're like, oh, ha ha ha, the actual Jabberwocky's over there. Like with Life of Brian, where you can be like, oh, ha ha, the actual Jesus is over there doing miracles and we're stuck with Brian.
Yeah, and while that's the thing too, is like while this one is more of, like, all the other stuff is a commentary, this also plays on the allegorical nature of fairy tales.
It does.
To the point where it kind of, don't get me wrong, I do appreciate that it does play on him falling up the ladder.
Of course, it's one of my favorite tropes.
It just kind of doesn't work because all the goofiness feels accurate in our misconceptions of medieval times and fantasy worlds.
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, Holy Grail worked where Jabberwocky fails, is Holy Grail was meant to be a laughing jab at how stupid our understanding of King Arthur and the Round Table is. Like, none of it is based in any actual history, and you know that. That's why it's so silly, and that's why when they do bring in actual history about, like, the French being in England, it's hilarious if you know the joke.
Yeah, because it builds up that historical context where this is...
I think this is where this is a Terry production and not a full group production kind of shows off.
It feels less fanciful than...
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I really do like Terry and his other works, even as a solo writer and director. But I think when we're talking about this kind of humor and this level of, honestly, layering, because that's what made the Monty Python world work, was there's a lot of layers, a lot of stuff happening, even if it was a very simple set or budget or costuming department. Those layers is what kind of helped keep everything running.
Yeah.
And this one really only has kind of 2 layers, and that they flop between the 2.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say it takes these multiple layers and just scatters them in hopes they work together.
Yeah, and again, don't get me wrong, I still liked this movie. This movie is still fun. My only critique that I, like, personally am like, I don't know if I'd watch this every single week like I do with other Monty Python or other Terry productions, is that the potty humor is just a little too much for my taste, which is saying something because I do find a fart joke hilarious. So, like, it's just a little bit outside of my normal realm.
A bit out of place.
A little bit out of place, but I will be returning to this movie.
Yeah. So then, Chris, rent by streamer declined that we ever watched Jabberwocky despite having an audio recording of us watching it.
This is a little bit hard because you have a cool copy of this.
I do have the Criterion one, which I did not go through the special features on. I usually don't for these types of reviews, and I kind of wish I did.
I thumbed through them. I did not have time to watch everything because it's Criterion, and I only have so many hours in the day. But I like the Criterion version of it. I did like the bits that were in. Granted, this one is not as heavy in the extras as others. Others in the Criterion come with, like, whole-ass books. This one has just, like, an average amount of behind-the-scenes snippets, like, interesting on the Jabberwocky model itself, and some interviews with people in the cast and crew and all that. But I think for most people, I think for 99% of people, maybe just stream it.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with you on that and stream it, because while, again, I do love Gilliam, it's my least favorite of his, but
yeah,
the reason I do say it is at least worth a watch is because it is that stepping stone where you can see him start to try and set himself slightly apart from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I mean, like I mentioned before, you see the kind of that groundwork of he's building this kind of fanciful world through slightly through one arc that we see pick up back in his next flick, Time Bandits.
Yes, absolutely.
So, which that has its sketches and stuff through history.
Yeah, no, and don't get me wrong, my favorite directors by far are the directors who are not all golden horses or, like, chickens laying golden eggs. I like a director and a writer who has a couple flops or a couple not quite as finished pieces, because I think it's so interesting to see that growth and progression, and also, like, how obviously, like, we are working through some ideas in this movie that we then do see much better done later in his works.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited because I finally picked up The Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
You're gonna like it.
It's been on my list, but last Criterion sale, I saw that, and I saw the collection of The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, thinking it was the same one, and not the 50s Czech version compared to his.
It's unfortunately not the same, but no, you're gonna love it.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I do like this. I think for some of us, this is maybe a buy, but I think most people should stream it. At least watch it once.
No, I agree with that. So, but we are done with history and allegorical fairy tale nonsense for now. But
for now. We'll return.
Prepare yourself as the heats of summer arise and we enter hell.
Oh gosh, whatever could we be doing there?
Yeah, with the guest too.
Hooray!
Well, in a couple episodes, but...
Yeah.
Hell awaits us, listeners.
Oh boy, I can't wait.
This has been the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of the good, the bad, and the weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.